Ever feel like you're only seeing the tip of the iceberg with what's going on in Palo Alto? Like
Mm.
you're missing the inside scoop on the city council meetings.
Yeah.
Well, today we're diving deep, deep into those meetings
Deep.
using the actual summary minutes from January 2024. And let me tell you, these minutes are anything but boring.
Right. They're a gold mine. A gold mine of those passions and the
Oh,
conflicts,
yeah.
the hopes and anxieties that make Palo Alto what it is.
Totally. And we're not just looking at what happened, but reading between the lines.
Exactly.
Why were these topics chosen? Were there any tensions? How does this all reflect on governing a city as diverse as Palo Alto?
And complex. Don't forget complex.
Right, exactly. So, January 22nd, regular meeting, public comment period, always a wild ride. This one resident wanted to understand the city's long-range finances, really worried about deficits and how that would impact services.
Yeah, that's understandable. The council has to walk a tightrope with that kind of stuff. Balance the needs of everyone with a limited budget.
Right. And the council members themselves had, well, different takes on the forecast. Some were like, hey, we're conservative budgeters, we're probably fine.
Right.
Others were worried about the future, especially with the possible recession. It's a hard job.
It is. And remember, that forecast, it didn't even include some pretty big things. The Cubberley Center redevelopment, the need for affordable housing, that list goes on.
That's always something, right? Speaking of, January 22nd also had this debate about, get this, moving a public easement for the Castilla School expansion.
Sounds boring, but
But it turned into this whole thing about power dynamics and transparency.
it wasn't just about some lines on a map anymore.
Exactly. Some residents felt like the city was giving away a valuable asset for nothing. They were worried about the sewer line, too.
Oh, right, the sewer line over the planned pedestrian tunnel, that was a whole other can of worms.
For sure. They didn't feel like the city was being straight with them. And, they questioned if the school's influence had anything to do with it.
I see. Yeah, that can get kind of dicey. Private interests versus public resources. Makes you think about communication and how important it is for our officials to be upfront.
Big time. Okay, but it wasn't all doom and gloom on January 22nd.
Oh, right.
Stanford women's basketball coach Tara Vanderveer.
How could I forget? Legend.
So the council took a minute to celebrate her huge accomplishment,
Yeah.
becoming the winningest coach in NCAA basketball history.
What a moment. Even with everything else going on, they recognized her. Good for them.
Agree. Okay, so we've talked finances, development projects. Now let's move to the January 29th special meeting.
Priorities, right.
Exactly. Setting priorities for 2024. And, oh boy, public comment was lively.
Oh, I bet. What were people fired up about?
Everything. But there was this one moment, really powerful, where someone spoke about the conflict in Gaza. They urged the council to call for a ceasefire.
Wow.
Yeah, really makes you think about how global issues hit close to home.
They do. So what happened?
They didn't do a formal resolution, but the whole thing showed how much people here care about a more peaceful world. And that desire for peace, it kind of went hand in hand with other comments about affordable housing, climate change, making Palo Alto welcoming for everyone.
Making everyone feel like they belong.
Right. And that's where things got interesting.
Oh, how so?
Well, some council members thought belonging was too vague a concept, hard to define and measure.
I can see that.
But others, like Councilmember Lithcott-Hames, argued that it's a basic human need to feel safe, accepted, valued.
Yeah, that makes sense.
She was very passionate, saying that when people don't feel like they belong, it leads to, isolation, division, even hate, which obviously has real-world impacts.
Powerful point. So did they add it?
They did. Belonging is officially a priority for 2024, along with community health and safety, economic development, climate change, and housing.
Ambitious.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive, everybody. Last time we left off with those mysterious ad hoc committees. They sound kind of secretive, right?
A little bit, but really they're just how the council gets down to business.
Okay, so like smaller groups within the council.
Yeah, like task forces. They each tackle a specific issue, gather info, then give their recommendations to the whole council.
Gotcha. What kind of stuff did they work on last year?
In 2023, let's see, there was the Cubberley Center redevelopment, then relations with Stanford, climate action, and retail strategy, and of course housing and legislative affairs.
Wow, that's a lot. But didn't we talk about transparency with those committees?
Right, that's the thing. Not all committees are created equal. Some have to follow the Brown Act, that's California's open meeting law.
So the public can attend.
Exactly.
And
But others, they're more behind the scenes.
interesting. And this actually sparked a debate, right? At the January 29th meeting.
It did. Councilmember Koo, she wanted more openness from the Retail Ad Hoc Committee. They deal with local businesses, residents. She thought it should all be out in the open.
She makes a good point.
She did. Even suggested having people from neighborhood associations join in.
Wow, that would be interesting. But again, it's tough, right? Balancing how things get done with keeping the public informed.
For sure. Speaking of keeping the public informed, what about those residents asking about climate initiatives?
Oh, yeah. They were like, don't just tell us it's happening, give us details.
Rightfully so. They wanted to know the costs, the deadlines, how they're measuring success, all of it.
And Councilmember Lithcott-Hames, she had this idea about how to present that information.
What was it?
She thought they could learn a thing or two from Stanford. Apparently, they have great research on climate communication. Her point was, make it relatable, tell a story, highlight local wins, connect with people emotionally.
Much more effective than just hitting them with facts and figures.
Totally. And speaking of wins, remember how they celebrated Coach Vanderveer?
Hard to forget.
Mayor Stone suggested they do something similar, but for sustainability efforts.
What, like a competition?
Not exactly. More like highlighting residents who are going above and beyond, adopting new tech practices.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
Like community ambassadors for a greener Palo Alto.
Exactly. But let's not forget, behind all these plans and goals are the people who actually make it happen, city staff.
Right. And that's not always easy.
It came up during the meeting. Staffing shortages across departments are making it hard to move forward on, well, almost everything.
It's a common problem. How do you compete with those big salaries and benefits offered by private companies, especially here where the cost of living is so high?
Exactly. So, did they figure out a solution?
No miracle cure, but they talked about streamlining the hiring process, maybe even looking into workforce housing.
Okay, so recognizing that they need to support their employees.
Yes, because without them, nothing else really gets done.
True. So we got all these great plans, but how do they pay for it?
Ah, yes, the million-dollar question. And this is where the Finance Committee steps in. They're the ones looking at budget proposals, revenue, deciding how to spend the city's money.
Sounds like a stressful job.
You bet. And they had their work cut out for them at this meeting. There were requests for all sorts of things.
Can you give me an example?
Well, Councilmember Koo, for one, she was very passionate about fire safety, wanted to make sure all the stations had water trucks, especially with the drought.
Can't argue with that. Those recent wildfires are no joke.
Exactly. So it's about prioritizing. But then you also had requests for funding the Mitchell Park Place project. That's all about community spaces and expanding programs.
Wow, so many tough choices. How do you even begin?
That's what we're going to find out. In the final part of our deep dive, we'll see how the council tackled these funding requests, tried to balance all those demands, and tried to make sure they represented what the community actually wants.
And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into the Palo Alto City Council.
We've gone from a disappearing toilet to, well, how the city spends its money.
It's been a wild ride, but that's local government for you. And in this last part of the January 29th meeting, we see the council really wrestling with those tough decisions.
Trying to make all those goals a reality.
With a limited budget, which always makes things interesting.
It does. It's like everyone wants a greener city, more affordable housing, but
someone has to figure out how to pay for it all.
exactly. You can't just wave a magic wand and poof, there's more money.
And that's where I imagine things get tricky for the council, because they have to prioritize, choose between all these important issues.
They do. And it's not just about, crunching numbers. There's a moral aspect to it.
Right, making sure resources are used fairly and that everyone's needs are taken into account.
Exactly. And this is where, that idea of belonging comes back.
Because it's not enough to just fund programs. People need to feel like those programs represent them.
Exactly. And a big part of that is making sure everyone has a voice. And that was clear in some of those funding requests, like making sure investments are going into underserved neighborhoods.
Right, so everyone benefits,
Yeah.
not just certain groups.
Yes. And Councilmember Stone, Remember, he wanted to look at how Stanford communicates about climate change.
Oh, yeah, to make it more engaging.
Right. It's all connected, making sure residents feel heard, like they're part of the process.
Definitely. Which brings us back to those ad hoc committees,
Yeah.
the ones we talked about earlier. Powerful groups, but kind of behind the scenes.
And that came up again here. Some council members wanted more transparency, updates to the full council, maybe even open meetings so residents could see what's happening.
I can see both sides.
Mhm.
On one hand, these committees need to be able to do their work, dive into complex issues.
But public deserves to know what's going on.
Exactly. It's a tough balance.
Yeah.
And I think that's what it all boils down to, finding that balance between getting things done and making sure everyone feels included.
Because at the end of the day, what happens in those meetings, it affects all of us living in Palo Alto.
So this has been, wow, a crash course in local government.
Yes.
We hope you found it interesting, maybe even a little inspiring.
Yeah. Maybe you'll even attend a meeting yourself.
Make your voice heard.
Exactly. Because Palo Alto, it's not just a city, it's a community. And we all have a role to play in shaping its future.